Okay, how about we just start? I'm wondering if I should probably start with something that's a little bit regular, like, hi, welcome to this live stream, or something like that. So maybe I should have a think about that for next time to see if there's some way that I can regularly start these so that you know what you're going to expect. Or I could just start with a random stream of consciousness. That works too, I guess. Not the worst idea in the world. So, hi, I guess. Welcome to the final live stream of this year. Thanks to everyone saying hello in the chat. Hi, Heather. Hi, Sally, David, Jessica, Vicky, Maria. Just picking a handful of names I can actually pronounce from the words that will come to me shortly. Lots of stuff going on today. It's been a big year and I've got some additional stuff to share with you. So that's going to be fun. And let's jump into it. All right. So first things first, this is a live Q&A live stream. Live stream? I definitely needed to say that. So if you have questions that you would like me to respond to, please put them in the chat, in the comments. That would be really helpful. If I don't see it, feel free to post it again. We also have the super chat option, which brings it up for me so I can actually see it for a longer time and it doesn't get lost in the comments. So that's something we can use as well. In the meantime, and I'll tell you more about this in a minute because I want to jump into some questions, but there's a special event happening after this live stream as well. So check out the details in the comments in the description if you're interested to hear more about that before I tell you about it directly. So just kicking off with a couple of questions from our Patreon community. Firstly, a really, really quick one from Heather. Will you be doing more live streams next year? Yes, hopefully. Every time I have asked this incredibly biased audience of who happens to be on a live stream, the answer has always been, yes, we would like to see more live streams this year, or just in general. So I've been experimenting with that this year. Some of you have been to quite a few that I've been doing over the last couple of months. So I'm kind of getting the hang of it. It's a pretty big step outside of my comfort zone. I usually prefer to be more prepared, and you can't really be prepared, or I can't really be prepared for an event like this. I also much prefer to know what I'm talking about and to feel like what I'm doing is really valuable and just having a really clear sense of that. And again, with this type of thing, I don't always get that feeling because sometimes I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm just responding. So pros and cons, I recognize that that's part of the experience and that's part of why so many of you have requested that I do more live streams. So I'm hoping to incorporate it more next year as well. About once a month or once every 2 months sounds feasible. So let's see how we go. Yeah, wish me luck with that. And yeah, I'll get inspired by each event and hopefully it will become a bit more of a pattern. So yeah, thanks for that question, Heather. Another really interesting question from Cornelia is around privacy, for lack of a better word. Like how do you manage sharing things about yourself in public without knowing what happens, right? So in other words, like once I share something to the internet, it's, public from then on. And in a sense, it's out of my control because it takes on a life of its own. Once I post a video, that video has a life of its own. People listen to that video and share that video and comment on that video and criticize that video potentially. And it doesn't, like, I no longer have any control over what happens to that content, really. So that is definitely a little bit scary. And when I was first starting this channel, I had a lot of people ask me to take a step back and question that. Like, are you really sure? Are you really, really sure that you want to go on YouTube and tell everyone you're autistic and share some of the more challenging aspects of life that people would not normally see? And that was a serious question that obviously needed some serious thought. Like, you don't want to do that stuff without any thought. And it's been a challenge to get the balance right. And if I had to say my philosophy with that, it really helps to have a very, very clear boundary with what's personal versus what's private. So, as you know, I share a lot of personal things on the internet to people that I've never met. And I personally think I personally think sharing personal things, there's a place for that. And the whole point of the channel is that I am sharing personal things in the hope that I relate to things at a personal level, relate to you at a personal level. So the channel wouldn't be anywhere near what it is today without that. So I feel like that's a really important aspect. At the same time, having a really clear boundary about what I do share and what I don't share is also really important. So I often describe the difference between personal and private. Like, personal is something that really matters to me. Private is something that I'm choosing not to share, either because it's too sensitive, or it's just not appropriate to share, or it's too much detail for the relationship. So I share a certain level of detail publicly, and there's a much greater, more nuanced level of detail that I might share with an intimate partner, for example. So yeah, that's definitely challenging. And I think one of the things that helps the most is hearing your feedback that it's actually valuable and it is worthwhile sharing personal experiences and gathering personal experiences from the community, because when we hear someone else share a personal experience that really resonates, that's a really connecting experience. So I think that's valuable, and it's really helpful when I hear feedback from all of you that it's valuable as well. Yeah, so thanks so much for that question as well, Cornelia. Right, you've been going crazy in the chat, which is fantastic. I can't read everything, but I can do things like this. Thank you to Eleanor de Howler, Werewolf Queen. Just wanted to send some love to a fellow autistic person. Thank you very much. Okay. So we're getting some great support in the super chat, which is fantastic. Thank you for the vids. Don't have any questions, that's fine. I just appreciate the support. So thanks for that. Let me see if I can find our next question in the chat. Okay. Does anyone else try to do two things at once, like working online while also listening to a podcast? So that sounds like a question for everyone in the chat. So I'm sure Pam's Story for Humans will appreciate everyone's answer for that. I personally prefer usually to do one thing at a time. I have observed that it might be an ADHD thing to like to do a couple of different things at a time, or maybe it's just a personality thing. But I've definitely noticed it in a lot of my ADHD friends. I often get distracted. I sort of feel like if I do too many things, then I'm not focusing my energy on one of them enough. I do like to do sort of mindless, repetitive things in the background. So I might be walking while I'm listening to an audiobook, or I might be doing something else like that in the background. It's not actually taking any time, any mental energy. It's not actually taking any attention. It's just sort of my body is doing stuff by itself on autopilot in the background, just because it can. So it's usually not productive. It's not like I'm cooking and I'm reading and I'm chatting on the phone at the same time, right? Those kind of things. So yeah, that's just me personally. Interested to hear people in the chat if that's different for all of you. Oh, I saw a question and then it ran away from me. Let me try and find it again. Aha, is this it? I have a question. Do you know what autism levels are? And if so, what level are you at? What level am I at? Cool. I do happen to know what autism levels are. They are part of the diagnosis, essentially. And levels are 1, 2, and 3. And it goes, you can look up a more technical definition, but very, very briefly, it's basically level 1 is needs some support, level 2 is like needs moderate support, and level 3 is like needs a high degree of support. So they're basically how much support do you need to be able to function, thrive, do your thing, essentially. So I would be very clearly in the level 1 category with that. The types of supports I need are communication supports, like having a phone call for me just cuts down the amount of time and energy I spend trying to understand a situation. Having an in-person conversation compared to trying to read an email, for example, or sensory issues, or other types of relatively minor environmental changes that can accommodate me in a space, so that the space becomes accessible. On the grand scheme of disability, the accommodations that I need are relatively minor. They're very important, but they're relatively minor. An example that I often give with this is like having a hearing aid, right? Or wearing glasses. If you need glasses and you wear glasses, you can't just not have them because you don't see without them, right? Imagine you have a hearing aid and it doesn't have batteries today, and so you can't hear anything, right? That's a big problem. But at the same time, it's a relatively small thing. As soon as I get my glasses, as soon as my hearing aid's fixed, then I can participate reasonably well in society. Whereas some accommodations for disability, especially in autism, are much, much, much more significant in terms of the level of intensity that someone needs. So, for example, if I needed a one-on-one support to leave the house, for example, that is a much greater level of support required. Anyway, very brief answer to that question. There are more technical answers around. So why don't I look at the comments again? I really love how interactive we're being in the comments. So it's great to hear all of you chatting with each other. Oh, actually, that is a great segue to a bonus event that's happening at the end of this live stream. You can see the details in the description. But essentially, we're having an end of year tea time social on Zoom, which is will be hopefully a relatively moderately small group of people where we can actually meet each other. You'll have the opportunity to say hello, introduce yourself, ideally. provided there's not too many people. And that means we get to meet each other from all over the world, which is really fun. We do fairly, well, semi-regular socials with our Patreon community. And so this time I thought I'd open it up for everyone. It's, of course, free for AFTI members if you're already a member. And if you're already a member, you probably already know about it. But if you're just hearing about it today, it's a ticketed event. It's $5 Australian to come along. Hopefully that's not too much of a barrier. And yeah, happening straight after this event. So that's exciting. Hope to see quite a lot of you there. Again, you'll find the details of that in the chat. I always say chat when I mean description. Question for all of the chat. What's everyone's interests? I think that might be interests. Or it could be my brain not reading words, which happens all the time. We also had another interesting question from Patreon before we started the live stream around what question do I wish I was asked? And I didn't have an immediate answer to that question, but what came to mind is there's a very interesting paradox between I kind of want to talk about my special interests and I also kind of don't want to talk about my special interests. So whenever someone asks me, I am a bit hesitant to share too much. I'll often caveat things with, just so you know, this is my special interest and I could talk about this for hours. So please let me know how much you would like to hear, because there's a lot more if you are game to hear it. And recently, my special interest has actually been changing a little bit. So I'll give you a tiny little snapshot of that without spending the next 4 hours downloading all the really exciting stuff that I've been learning. So as many of you would know, my primary interest is in emotional intelligence. And when I discovered I was autistic, that morphed a little bit, not only emotional intelligence, not only personality types, but it morphed into understanding neurodiversity and neurotypes and how different people think, not just how different personalities think, but how different neurotypes function, and what are the ways that our brain works and things like that. So recently that has transformed even more into something called adult psychological development, which sounds kind of technical, but is another more powerful way of understanding people and culture and how we think and how we operate. And from an emotional intelligence perspective, if we can kind of recognize the way that so if I'm talking to someone and I can recognize the patterns in how they're communicating and how they're thinking, it really helps a lot in making a connection with that person, in recognizing what they are going to understand and what they're not going to understand. I don't know if you've had this experience where sometimes you talk to someone and they just get it straight away. You say 3 words and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And then other people, you just explain and explain and explain, and you explain it this way and this other way, and you try and find new and better ways to try and explain yourself. I've used the word explain about 6 times in the last 4 sentences. Describe and communicate what's going on for you, and they just don't get it. And there's some really good reasons for that. And it's really exciting to recognize what is necessary for someone to understand. Anyway, that's enough out of me for that particular topic for the moment. Let's see if there are more questions in the current chat. Okay, here we go. if I can click on the right one before it goes away. How do you cope with vulnerability when the mask comes off? I'm 69 and just now really dealing with this. So thanks for that question. It's hard. Where my brain goes these days when I hear questions like that, it immediately recognizes that take the mask off is a binary statement. Mask on, mask off. What if the reality was more of a mask less? I'm not going to take the mask off all in one go. I'm going to slowly share more and more and more of myself. So as I'm realizing even more and more, writing my book at the moment, a big part of unmasking is relearning a new way of being, like learning a new personality style, learning new strategies and making those strategies become my own. It's a little bit like going to a new culture or a new place or moving house or getting a new job or something like that. There's a lot of new stuff and it's difficult in the beginning, but the more I practice it, the more I create new routines and new ways of being and ways of working and things to do that actually work. So unmasking is a little bit like that. Why would I think that suddenly taking off the mask is going to just make everything better when I've never tried it before? Usually in everything else in life, if I want to get good at something, I have to practice. So similarly with unmasking, if I want to be good at showing up in public and in my relationships without the mask, then I need to practice. And so obviously it's going to be really hard in the beginning. It's like learning a musical instrument. I can't just pick up a guitar when I've never seen one before and expect to be good at it. It's going to be really awkward and sound kind of horrible in the beginning. And there's my skills are very, very limited until I practice them and they get better over time. So let me quickly just deal with a annoying spam user. Thank you, those who have flagged spam comments. That's really helpful. We've got a couple of moderators who are helping out, but every once in a while, people are not very polite on the internet. So what was I saying? Yeah, so just with practice, the vulnerability is a little bit less. So like performing, I'm not going to stand up and do a performance on a new musical instrument that I haven't played before. I'm going to start by playing it in private where I can make mistakes without feeling such vulnerability. And then when I do take it out in public, I'm going to show a little bit about what I'm comfortable with. And then the more I'm comfortable with it in private, I might share with one or two friends, and then I might get more and more confidence to take it out into even more public spaces. So that vulnerability of taking the mask off is really, really common, expected, for lack of a better word. And yeah, bit by bit with practice, the only thing I would suggest is to try and identify where your safe first spaces are. All right, safe first spaces meaning people you have judged to be better capable of holding your vulnerability. Some people are not all that good at holding space for us when we're vulnerable. So recognizing the one or two relationships I have that are really good at that means I can really leverage those in building the confidence before tackling the big wide world. Okay, hopefully that was helpful for that one. Yes. So also, while we're here, we also I know a lot of you are already members through the Autism from the Inside website. We're actually having a flash sale this weekend on annual memberships. So if you want 20% off an annual membership, you can check that out. We're about to wrap up for the year, so you can have a look at all the events that we've got planned for next year. We've only put up a handful so far, but we're doubling the amount of social catch-ups next year. So still a different topic of webinar every month, and we're going to have two different social catch-ups. And interestingly, we're experimenting with a new platform for social catch-ups as well. So some of our Patreon community are already familiar with that. It's sort of early days, but I'm kind of excited about building more ways for the community to interact and for you to meet others in the community as well, because I sort of feel like that's a really important part of finding out you're autistic, is connecting with other people. And if you're all here, there must be some thing that ties you all together that would be really great to explore more as we meet as a community. So that's one of the reasons that this kind of tea time social that we're having at the end of this live stream is really great, because there's something that ties us all together that's really hard to pinpoint. And when we all get in the same room, in this case on Zoom, but still, then all of that kind of steals my words, and then I don't have any more. Okay. Very quick question. Do you have kids? If yes, what's your experience? Well, I can very quickly answer that question, because no, I do not have kids of my own. I have a niece and nephew, which is great. So there are kids in my sort of slightly wider family, but I don't have any personal kids. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. So, okay. Let's try another question. And great idea to actually start the comment with the word question. That definitely helps me to find the questions in the comments. It's not fair to say that we lack empathy. We lack mirror neurons, not meaningful emotion. We exhaust ourselves. So why are we judged as having less empathy? So let me summarize the question a bit. Why is there this stereotype that autistic people don't have empathy? In my opinion, it's mostly because the way we connect is often quite different to our peers, essentially. So if I really like to connect by talking to people about ideas, and my friends really like to connect by drinking beer and not really talking about very much at all, then it's going to be a little bit difficult. There's already an empathy gap there. So similarly, if the way I respond to bids for interaction is a little bit different. So if I don't have the same eye contact, or if I'm a little bit shy, or if I sort of run away for a bit and want to watch a situation until I get used to what's happening, and then I can join in later, all of that looks like social isolation. It looks like I don't want to participate in society. And unfortunately, that can be a little bit of a feedback loop, because if I give the impression, correctly or incorrectly, that I don't want to participate, then others will stop trying to interact with me because they think I don't want to participate. They think I don't want to interact. They think I don't want to connect. And so it kind of spirals a little bit, and which is really sad, especially for kids who don't know what's going on. They just kids just follow their instincts. And when I followed my instinct, it left me by myself with no one to play with. So that's not fun. Thankfully, as I've gotten older and my brain has come online a little bit more in terms of self-awareness and social awareness and all of these other emotional intelligence things, which are normal to develop as people get older. We don't expect quite such a high degree of emotional intelligence from kids because they're still learning about themselves and the world. But it gives much more ability to overcome those types of barriers. And similarly, the best case scenario is that my peers increase their emotional intelligence, which means that when I say things like, don't worry if I'm not looking at you, or if I look like I'm not paying attention, I'm actually listening, they can deal with their own cognitive dissonance there and say, oh, okay, that just must be his way of listening and he's still listening. And that way they can still do their part to at least meet me halfway. I don't know if that had anything to do with the question, but hopefully it was something, something similar. So a related one, what are your thoughts on autism and hyperempathy? In my experience, just talking to people, it seems like a very high percentage of autistic people do have hyperempathy in the sense that they react very strongly to the emotions and the energy of the people around them. And what's very interesting, sorry. Yep, looks like quite a lot of people in the chat are resonating with this at all, as well. A very interesting but paradoxical thing that happens with hyperempathy is if you're the kind of person who reacts very strongly to energy and emotion, it's likely that you will avoid energy and emotion from other people because it's too much. It's like, I'm not going to watch that horror movie. No, I don't want to go to a big social gathering or something that's too loud or too exciting or too sad or too much conflict. I'm going to avoid a lot of those things because the emotions are just, sorry. Because the emotions are just the reflexive, I can't help but feel this because you're sad and now I'm even more sad. It is really hard to talk. I saw a question earlier in the chat, I think, about chronic illness. And I've been talking about this in a few recent videos. Sorry. And there was also another question from Jess on Patreon about where I see myself in 5 years' time. And so putting all of those together, it's been a really crap couple of months in terms of health and mental health and executive function and brain fog and migraines and you name it. It's been sort of one thing after the other. So again, I think probably a lot of us have experienced something like that, if not always ongoing, then sort of periods of just, there's not much I can do at the moment. Like I used to get frustrated that I wasn't making enough progress writing my book as I would like. And now I'm thinking, actually, it's got nothing to do with my book. It's not that I am particularly struggling with that one thing. It's just that if overall health in terms of a chronic health kind of mindset, if that is flaring up. Some people use that word. Again, I don't personally, I haven't previously considered myself to have any kind of chronic health things. So I'm still trying to find the words that best describe my situation. But sometimes if your body just says no, then there's not much you can do about it. Oh, I have a migraine today. Looks like I'm not going to work. Oh, I have the flu today. Looks like I'm not getting my book writing done today. And the reason I thought about that is because I've had, like, after everything, I thought I was finally well again, and then I get a cold a couple of days ago as well. So my throat is still a little bit on edge. So hopefully I don't run out of my water before the end of this call. But yeah, thanks for everyone who is showing support in the chat. Thanks, Heather, and others. So we have a little bit of time left today. The runway is going to be my voice, and when my water runs out. So it can probably have one or two more questions, and then, as I mentioned earlier, for anyone who's just joined, we've also got an end of year social on Zoom happening at the end of this live stream, which you can see in the chat. There's still opportunity to get a ticket to that if you haven't already. This is an interesting question. Is it hard to tell the truth? I'm wondering what you mean by that, Gillian, because the stereotype, the stereotype is that autistic people always tell the truth. And trying not to nerd out too much on my adult psychological development, but learning how to manage truth and lies and openness and privacy is a very developmental thing. And I think a lot of us kind of skipped that step. So we have this kind of gap in our skill set of managing to protect information. And so I have some of my videos on lying. Some of my videos on lying try to reframe it away from telling the truth, telling a lie, to building your skills about protecting sensitive information and being transparent without violating privacy and things like that. So yeah, most people would resonate, I think, with the I can't stop myself from being truthful type of version of that. I know for a very long time, I had a very moral idea that you have to tell the truth and it's the right thing to do. And everyone who doesn't do that is a horrible human being. And looking back on that, it sounds a little bit childish, which kind of makes sense. I was a child at the time, and these types of views are most easily seen in children as well. And as we get older, our thinking tends to become a little bit more complex, and we realize, oh, I guess it's not always so black and white, and life is really complicated sometimes and can't always be simplified as much as we would like it to. So yeah, lots of interesting things going on there with telling the truth. And for me, the thing that's helped the most, well, two things. One is transitioning it from a black and white to a grayscale. So there's black and white, something is 100% true or 100% not true, to a grayscale of how accurate is this information? How precise is this information? I used to get angry at my parents because I would ask them what time it is, and they would say it's 2:00. And then I'd look at the clock later and I'd say, it's 1:58. Why did you tell me it was 2:00? Were they lying? No, not really. They weren't deceiving me in any way. They were being imprecise. So having that idea that I'm not lying, I'm being less precise when I tell someone a generic answer to a question without giving the details, because maybe the details are not appropriate in that situation. Maybe the details are private. Maybe the other person doesn't need to know the details. Maybe the details would make the other person not understand the situation, and instead I should just summarize it in a more general sense. So then I can start thinking about, how do I communicate most effectively? What am I trying to communicate? How do I do that effectively so that the other person understands? And then suddenly this is a lot more complicated than telling the truth versus telling a lie. But at the same time, because it's a lot more nuanced, it's actually easier to navigate complex social things, because I've got better tools for that. So anyway, that's how I like to think about it. And I have also found it gets a lot easier with practice, like a lot easier with practice. I used to really, really struggle to withhold details from people. And now I do it deliberately sometimes because it's just easier. And the more I am aware of the social implications of that, and the more I'm aware of how common it is and what someone else would think if they realized I was withholding details. And most of the time they would think, oh yeah, that's fine. I mean, if I wanted to know more, I would have asked more, but your simple answer was fine. So it actually saves, in a lot of situations, it saves everyone a lot of time and energy, and helps with connection if I give less details and be less precise. So yeah, that is something that I've been working on and practicing personally. This is an interesting question. How old do you feel mentally? I'm not sure how to answer that, because one of the things I'm learning with adult psychological development, why do I keep bringing that up? I know why I keep bringing that up. It's because it's really interesting, is that there are a lot of social things for kids that lead them to develop quite regularly. We can even, there's lots of stuff on child development. But as adults, our life experience can be quite different. So adults do not regularly, predictably develop in certain ways, because life is just too varied to have a predictable. So when we start talking about age, it doesn't, is a 25-year-old more mature than a 35-year-old? It really depends on life experience, doesn't it? Right? So probably not, because 10 years is a long time. But at the same time, 10 years, 25 to 35, makes a much bigger difference than 10 years, 55 to 65, right? So how old do I feel? Well, what does age even mean in a mental sense? I remember someone telling me once, one of these sort of funny life riddle question things, would you prefer to be have the mind of a 90-year-old and the body of a 30-year-old, or the body of a 30-year-old and the mind of a 90-year-old? And I'm like, that's an easy question. I will have the body of a healthy 30-year-old, thank you very much, and I will have the mind of a healthy 90-year-old, thank you very much. Win-win. Because in some sense, our mind does not deteriorate in the same way our bodies do. And at the same time, our mind does not necessarily get more mature just because we're adding birthdays under our belt. So I feel like I have adequately avoided that question, and we can probably move on to another question. Do I have any sensory sensitivities? Yes, quite a few. I'll list some of the really common ones first, and then I'll tell you about some interesting ones that probably some of you wouldn't know about. I'm very sensitive to smell, very sensitive to noise. That's why I always have earplugs at things. I'm not super sensitive to light as much as some people, but I have noticed that when I've got a migraine or when I've got a headache or just not feeling all that well, then lights are definitely a big thing. An interesting one though, people often think of the five senses, but there are at least 8 senses that we can talk about in a meaningful way. And one of the senses is called vestibular, which is essentially your inner ear sense of balance. And I have, because I have that's very sensitive for me. Number one, it gives me good balance, which is great. But number 2, it also means that I'm allergic to roller coasters. I can't go in like a merry-go-round. I can't spin around on the spot. Even dancing is too much. Some people like do a little twirl dancing. That would be too much for my head. I would just feel dizzy and nauseous because of this super sensitivity. So that's one that people don't always talk about. I remember when I was younger, people would do silly things like roll down hills. Like, why would you do that? I just felt so terrible. But if you have a different sensory profile and you're more of a sensory seeker in the vestibular sense, then rolling down a hill would be fun if you're 6, right? What else? Another interesting one is interoception and how well can I feel that inside of my body. And I feel like that's probably about normal. So I know a lot of people that I speak to in the autistic community find that they have hyposensitivity with that. They just don't really feel very much. The opposite is also really common though. So I think for me personally, the ones that make the most sort of day-to-day impact is probably the noise. Every once in a while, smell is a problem. And I'll have to discreetly not sit next to someone. Some people just everyday perfumes and colognes and stuff. I just can't get within 5 meters of someone if they've got a strong scent on. But that's okay. Okay. Yeah, this is an interesting one as well. We often talk about hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity, but sometimes it's more complex than that. It's not like there are lots of different types of touch. So sometimes I liking firm touch and not liking light touch, or vice versa. Like where does that fall? It's not quite so neatly described. Okay, this is an interesting question. Been dating a man for 2 years. How do I get him to open up? That's a really, really common question, actually, especially in relationships when one person wants more in a relationship than the other one. My personal advice in that situation is that trying to force someone to open up is likely to get them to resist opening up. So it's a bit paradoxical, but the more freedom someone has, the more likely they are to step outside of their comfort zone. That's my experience, at least. So weirdly, the way to get someone to open up is to help them feel safe, help them feel secure, and tell them they don't need to open up. Tell them you'd really love it if they did, but they don't need to. So it's sort of a bunch of different things. It's communicating really clearly that it's something that you would really appreciate. And it's also, at the same time, not putting any pressure to do that. Because the thing, in my experience, that shuts people down the most is the pressure to open up. So I don't know if any of you relate to that in the comments. But I know for me personally, I feel the most free when there are less expectations. So I know sometimes in social events, for example, I might feel like there's a lot of expectations around talking, for example. Like if I'm really tired, putting words together is quite difficult. But I know that if I go into a social occasion, someone is going to say something crazy like, "Hi, how are you going?" or something like that. And they're going to expect me to respond verbally. So what I do to reduce the expectations on myself is sometimes I have like a little card or something, or little things that I can give out to say, I'm mostly nonverbal today. And when I do that, I almost never have to use it. Because I've got it there and I can use it, it helps with the stress. And because I don't have to talk, it makes it a lot easier to talk most of the time. So okay, we're almost at the end of today's live stream. I'll have to wrap up soon so that we can jump over to the end of year Zoom social. Again, details in the description. However, why don't I do something really crazy and actually post the details directly in the comments for you? So there you go. I've posted the link in the comments. That way, if I accidentally say link is in the chat, then I'm not wrong this time. So that's really exciting. The end of the year is really exciting. It's been a huge year. Shout out to anyone else who's had a huge year. Does it feel like you're finally wrapping up? I feel like my body is just giving up for this year. It's like, look, I've pushed through a lot. We've done a lot. We've had a good run. Let's just have a break. So yeah, this is the last YouTube video for the year. I'm taking a couple of weeks off creating videos so that I can spend a bit more time writing my book in January next year. So we will be back with some premieres end of January next year. Thanks again, Eleanor. You've been a huge support recently, especially with questions and on the premieres. So yeah, really appreciate the support. So yeah, last live of the year, last video of the year, final social of the year directly after this. link in the description and the chat. Haha! I should do that more often. That way, no matter which one I happen to say, it'll still be correct. And for everyone on the Tea Time Social, I've got a bit of a surprise for you all at the end. Patreon supporters can probably guess what the surprise is because I already announced it to them, but that will be exciting as well. So I think I should wrap up there, because if I start trying to say goodbye now, it'll take me a couple of minutes and then I don't need to rush myself. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for the support this year, especially to everyone in our Patreon community. That has been invaluable for me to share ideas and feel your support in a more personal level there. So thanks again for that. And our little regular community that watches every premiere. It's nice to see so many familiar faces every week. If you would like to be an AFTI member, we're actually having a flash sale on annual memberships at the moment this weekend as a bit of an end of year thing. So all the details of that are in the description as well, but I might as well post it in the comments just because I can. So thanks again, everyone. I'll see some of you very shortly at our Tea Time Social, and we'll see you again. Have a happy New Year, Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and everything else. If you get a break, hopefully you can make the most of a break. I don't know why my words decided to stop right now, but I think you get the idea. Best wishes to all of you, and I will see you next year, unless you're coming to the social in 5 minutes.